All right. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we've got a special and a special host. Well, we'll start with the guests because we have manners. Mr. Steve, can you introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers?
Yeah, my name is Steven Chenault. I'm the CEO of Troll Lord Games. We've been in business since about 1999. Our flagship products are Castles and Crusades. We do a little bit of 5th edition. We actually have a 5e Kickstarter going at the moment. And then we've done a little bit of board games, card games, all kinds of stuff over the years. Worked with Gary Gygax for about 8 years up to the point he passed away. So we've been hacking away at it for a while. I've been at the helm since 2003. Matt Golden was the original CEO.
And I understand from Chuck, because we set this up with Troll Lord Chuck, that's actually his given name. His mom just didn't like it very much, so she did name him Troll Lord. So it's nice of you to, in sympathy, name your company that. We really do think that was mighty kind of you.
You know, we started calling ourselves trolls before trolling on the internet was a thing. So,
all right, as our special guest, our RPG nerd extraordinaire, we've got none other than Sparky. So, can you introduce yourself to people who might not remember? You've been on the show before.
Yeah. My name's Rob, aka Sparky. I run Old Times Tavern Gaming over on Twitch. We mostly stream TTRPGs, including Castles and Crusades is kind of our bread and butter right now, but we've sometimes run other OSR systems, and we get up to all kinds of weird shenanigans and have a good time.
So the next part of the introduction, dear listeners, how we first found them. I actually found Steve through Sparky. He's been trying to get me hooked on the math rocks and role playing. So he introduced me to your product when I was looking for. So I started with 5e. It was confusing as heck for me. Then I did 3.5, and the game fell apart. And that's when I started the 2e game with James Ward. That was the Crimson Hawk that ran for about a year. And so I was looking for something similar to that, and that's when Sparky stepped in and started introducing me to some of the OSR stuff and teaching me how to DM so I can do it for my kids as I figure it out.
Oh, excellent.
So Sparky, how did you find the one and only Mr. Trollord Steve?
Actually, it's kind of funny. Rollard over at Old School D&D, he always talked about how good Castles and Crusades was. But I'm gonna admit a bit of ignorance on my part. When I heard Castles and Crusades, I'm like, oh, this sounds like a Middle Eastern, role play. I'm like, well, that's really cool. Actually, I'm gonna go visit that in case we ever want to play that game. But it wasn't until later I started really looking at it. I'm like, holy cow, because at the time I was looking for a system closer to AD&D that was a little more refined and offered more options than like White Box or Source and Wizardry. And I started looking at it, I'm like, this really makes sense. This is what I've been looking for. And here we are.
All right. So now on to the religion question. This wouldn't be the Blasters and Blades if we didn't ask. So, Steve, no pressure, but there are answers here. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Which do I prefer? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Firefly, hands down.
That is not the answer that will get you kicked off the show. All right. So, and because we're polytheistic here, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, or The Wheel of Time?
Lord of the Rings, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
So I've been told by some of the people offline that we've asked this question to that question is unfair. It's basically how you want to cry and be disappointed in life by which book you read, because all of them have things that will break your heart inside of them. All three of those. Although George makes it a little. Go ahead.
I've never read The Wheel of Time. I've read Game of Thrones, and I don't say this often, but there's rarely been fiction that has made me as angry as the Game of Thrones. It made me so angry that I convinced myself to finish the series. So I'm not a huge fan of Game of Thrones, but I've never read Wheel of Time. I hear great things about it, but the books are a little bit daunting at 800 pages per volume, and there's a lot of volumes. So
I will say I have met Robert Jordan before he passed, and he was a nice fella. So there's that going for him.
You go.
All right, because we asked this one when it's a RPG guest. We've got one favorite RPG that you didn't publish.
Oh, AD&D, without a doubt. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I actually played AD&D. We published Castles and Crusades in 2005, and I kept playing AD&D until about 2006, until Mac and Davis, who created Castles and Crusades, who were at my table, said, "Look, we can keep playing AD&D, but you absolutely have to play CNC at least once before we're just going to quit. We're not going to play with you anymore." So I started playing CNC, and it was so very much like Castles and Crusades. It was like AD&D that I just rolled right into it, and I haven't looked back.
That's good. I started with Swords and Wizardry, but when he was telling me about the Siege Engine, at some point, once I get the hang of DMing, we were talking about switching over to that, because the way the Siege Engine works in your system sounds like it could be fun to play with.
Yeah, it's painfully easy. It is so easy. It actually will take you longer to adjust your playing style and your players into the playing style for using the Siege Engine, because it's so versatile. A lot of people who come from rules heavy, now I can't speak for Swords and Wizardry, but if you come from like 3rd edition or something like that are mechanics heavy, it takes you a little while to get out of your head that you don't need feats and all of that stuff, that you can try anything. And then whatever the players are doing, whatever craziness that they throw at you, the CK has an immediate reaction to it. It takes 3-4 games to kind of figure that out, I think, and then it's just a great game.
So my experience with 5e was I went to the Adventuring League at one of the local game shops, and this isn't a ding at the system. It's more at how the Adventuring League was run, but it was so almost scripted that they didn't allow for creativity in the moment. So, like, I'll give you an example. One of the players was there, and they were fighting in a basement that had a bunch of keg stands. If you've ever seen them, they're rows of kegs, like in a brewery. And so, because the guy they were fighting was OP, the character was like, "Well, let me hit the support stand and knock over these barrels of beer on them, and then while they're incapacitated, we get the free attack." You would think that actually is creative, and they're using everything around them. Like, no, you can't do that. Why? Because. And so it sort of made it hard to get your kids into it when their creativity is not rewarded. So I like systems that sort of foster that, because too often they're stuck in like technology that's telling them what to think and how to think and not letting them think for themselves.
Yeah, I ran into that when both of my sons are heavy video game players, and when they started playing CNC, it took them a few games to realize that pretty much anything goes. You don't have to wait for that wall where your plane just disintegrates and your character dies because you went too far, from where the designers laid it out, or what have you. And I think that 5e, I believe, is probably more versatile than that. That's kind of nutty to me.
That's definitely the Adventure League restrictions, not the system restrictions. And so I'm not, like I said, when you see that in action, it makes you appreciate a system specifically designed to give you the creativity to do the WTF moments that make you like, I didn't see that coming, but sure, let's go with it.
I watched this. This wasn't really a WTF moment, but I thought it was a fantastic moment. This was years ago. I was watching one of the online games, and one of the characters, I don't know what system they were playing, but they're tracking somebody that's on a horse or something. And once they get to town, they lose the tracks, obviously, because of all of the cobbled roads or whatever. But the player actually was really cool with it. He said, "Okay, I'm going to." I think it was a half orc. So I have an increased sense of smell. I'm going to try to smell the horse. Is there any way that I can pursue the horse, track the horse's scent? Since we've been pursuing it for a while. And obviously there's no rule for that. And I'm sitting there going, and I'm watching this as a GM, I'm thinking, oh, that's a fantastic idea. I would have just let the players run with that. That's just really cool. That's out of the box, the whole 9 yards. Mm-hmm. But the GM's like, no, you can't do that. What? Are you crazy? It's just, I don't know. And that's one of the things that the Siege Engine brings to the table, is because now you got a mechanic for it. Just make a check.
Yeah, it makes ruling on things like that just so much easier. You slap a challenge level on it and an attribute check, and
you're done. And there's it can be any attribute. You can pick the attribute. It doesn't matter. So it's, gives a lot of freedom to the CK. And once players kind of start realizing that they can push the boundaries. And let me tell you, I'm running 2 tables right now. One's people my age that have been gaming with forever and a day, and one's a bunch of young people under the age of 21. And these young people are absolutely crazy. I mean, they will try anything.
Because they don't know what's impossible. So it works.
Exactly. Yes.
So what is a CK? Is that your term for Dungeon Master, Game Master?
Yes, that's the Castle Keeper. I wish we had just gone with GM, but we went with CK for some reason. But there you go.
Yeah. All right. So before we dive too deeply into the games, because we are the Blasters and Blades podcast, we love both the fantastical and the scientific. So what was your first love? Sci-fi or fantasy?
Fantasy. I don't know, where does Tarzan fall on that? Fantasy was definitely of the two. I was an early Tarzan, Edgar Rice Burroughs reader back in the 70s, but that led me right into Lynn Carter and stuff like that.
I've heard compelling arguments for both Conan and Edgar Rice Burroughs being both fantasy and sci-fi, and that was back before they got so hung up on those titles where it was just generically speculative fiction. So I will just say yes, and we'll go.
I like it. That works.
When in doubt.
So,
but yeah, fantasy. I actually didn't start reading a lot of sci-fi probably until the late 80s, early 90s, because I'd read so much fantasy. I just needed something different. But fantasy definitely.
And back then, when most of your reading was libraries, sometimes you'd clear out the library where you've literally read everything in the genre, and it's just time to branch out.
Yep. You needed something to read.
But I'm old enough that I also remember looking up books in the Dewey Decimal System before the computers were up.
I remember that too.
Yep.
I purged it from my memory now that I don't have to use it anymore. So what was your first memory of engaging in speculative fiction? Was it the Conan, or was there something before it?
So the first book I ever read was a book called Early Bird, and it's about a bird getting a worm. And he befriends the worm. He doesn't want to eat it. I remember that book, but probably the first speculative fiction I read was Call of the Wild. I absolutely loved Call of the Wild. But Tarzan, The Jewels of Opar, number 5. This is going to be about 1974, somewhere around there, 1975, I guess. I don't know. I remember picking that up. My dad was in the military, so we got our books at what was that called? It wasn't the Four Seasons. It was the kind of convenience store. I can't remember what that thing was called.
The PX?
It wasn't the PX. It was like the small PX.
The Shopette?
The Shopette, yes. So, and I went in, and there's just all these books, and I picked up The Jewels of Opar, number 5, and I read it, and I absolutely loved it. And that just sent me back to those stands. Every time I had, they were about $1.25, I think, in those days, maybe 75 cents. I just scoop up a paperback and read it, whatever I could get. And I didn't read Tolkien until later. It was late 70s, probably, when I finally read The Hobbit, and probably in early 80s, mid 80s before I read Tolkien. I read just tons of fantasy before Tolkien.
So what is it about speculative fiction, the umbrella that includes all the things, that you love so much?
Well, I think it really, when you get into that stuff, it pushes the boundaries of the world that we live in, and it just makes the fantastical come alive. And we all sit around and we daydream or we dream or whatever, wherever it is in your headspace, and you see outside your window. And somewhere in I think we're kind of hardwired as Homo sapiens this way. We're kind of hardwired to look beyond what we see and to imagine things. I think that helps us, adapt to the environment, make tools, and all that goobly goop. But I think when you get into fantasy fiction, and I don't really know what it is, it taps it. Now Tarzan, I can tell you, tapped into the primeval. I've always had this kind of attachment to the primeval world, first through animals, Call of the Wild, White Fang, stuff like that. And so Tarzan played right into that. And I think that fantasy, once I kind of started reading a bunch of Burroughs stuff, of course, I went from Tarzan to Barsoom, the Warlord series, Princess of Mars, Warlord of Mars, and all that. And that kind of introduced me to a whole new genre of thinking. And I think really when you get into this fantasy, and this applies for science fiction, especially things like Serenity that kind of, go both sides of that, and even includes Western. Serenity kind of covers a whole bunch of genres simultaneously. It's a real tragedy they pulled that off the air. But when you look at this stuff, it allows you. I don't really like the term escapism, because I don't really consider myself. I'm not someone who wants to escape reality, but I like to see other realities. I like to believe. I don't know if you can see it, but I have molders. I want to believe on the wall behind me. I'm a huge fan of wanting to believe that there's something more than we are, than we can see or that we can measure or what have you. So fantasy fiction just dives right into that easily.
Okay. So how did your love of speculative fiction sort of writ large transitioning to you writing content in this? Because you've written some short stories, I understand, in the world where your games take place.
Yeah, we did way back in the 80s, so this is going to be late 80s, I tried to get published with TSR. I sent a bunch of adventures in, about 4, I think maybe 3. And in those days when I was in college and then post-college, I wrote a bunch of fiction. some of it literary nonfiction, some of it just fiction, some of it fantasy fiction. And I submitted these to magazines hither and yon. The only thing I ever got published in those days was actual historical pieces that were not fiction at all, which was just bizarre. But then that's kind of led me into a different direction, because when I started TLG, I was actually working on my PhD in history. But
I knew I liked you for a reason.
I got a lot of history and fantasy, and it's just. But so I guess Mac. I had shelved all of that when I was working on my PhD. You know, you got to do all this other work for that mess, and I kind of shelved it all. And then Matt Golden, a very, very good friend of mine, still we're very, very close. He's the guy who co-created the Siege Engine with Davis. He created a design called the Seeker, and we were going to Dragon Con in those days, and he started passing this design out. He and a buddy, his Chris, and we helped him pass the design out, and it just had some cool stuff in it, 2-page thing. And then later, he got kind of fired up. I don't know what. I guess D20 was coming out, because he was following all of the news in the industry. I didn't follow any of it. I didn't know what was going on. And he gave me a call and said, "Hey, dude, let's create a game company. Wizards of the Coast is fixing to open up all this stuff. Let's write some adventures and da-da-da-da." And there was a whole bunch of stuff that went into that event that kind of created Trollard Games. And he said, "You've got some. Let's take some of your old adventures." He really liked them. He edited them for me before I submitted them to get published. And let's take those adventures and kind of clean them up and put them out ourselves and go to Gen Con and see what we can do. He was just starting into his legal career, and I was, had just started in PhD. So it was a perfect time to poke in this direction. And then I started, and then Davis got involved. So we had 3, and this is really what kind of tipped it for me. Davis created one, Matt created one, and I created one. So 3 adventures. But the printer, a Canadian printer called Printy Print and Litho, told us if we did 4 books, then they would give us a huge discount. Basically we could get 4 for the price of 3. And Mac was like, "Steve, can you write up your world of Aird? Why don't you take all of these notes that you've been creating for Aird and make a world out of it? And let's do a short thing like the old Greyhawk folio and print it." And I said, "All right, I'll do that." So I wrote that. And that kind of that's the first time that I took all of these mountains of notes that I had on this world that we had been playing in forever, that was Greyhawk, and then it evolved into my own world. And I put it into a 24-page, I should probably have that. Oh, yeah, I did. A 24-page book called The After Winter Dark Fantasy Campaign Setting. And that became my 4th book. And that really kind of launched me in this direction. It sold very, very well, continued to sell. And then I wrote the Codex of Aird after that. And that just kind of unleashed it for me, and then the fiction, of course, once Aird has been around now since 2000. That's when we first released it. And it's got a decent fan base. I mean, we get a lot of requests for fiction. So I started kind of rolling fiction out in the last couple of years.
I think the hallmark of a good IP is whenever whatever format it comes, people want more and they want it to branch out into other mediums. So you play it as a game, man, I'd love to read those novels, or I'd love to see that movie or play that video game. Like, that's a sign that you hook people in your world, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's very flattering that people have really gotten into the world of Aird and enjoyed it. Obviously my history background, working my PhD, all that crap, fed right into the world. And when you read when you read the Codex of Aird, it's less. It's mythological, but it's kind of written, from a historical point of view. You know what I mean? Not so much mythological tales as it is history. That first part of the Codex can be kind of dense to
It was great, but it was quite a read.
Yeah.
So we gave you the question in advance, but sometimes we like to add hoc in. So you mentioned you got your start writing adventures and just submitting them cold to TSR back in the day. So do you pay that forward and take submissions if any of your Uber fans were like, "Man, this is a lot of fun, let me write something for this system," and send it in? Do you take those kind of submissions?
Absolutely. It's pretty simple. There's something on the website, somewhere on the website. It'll have how to submit, and all you have to do is introductory letter, what you want to write, what you're thinking about, and if it's an adventure, kind of map it out for us, and then 3 pages of content so that we know that you can write. That it's not, it's a decent writing.
That's fair. So many creative types will let their own real life experiences influence the stories they tell. So are there any formidable moments that you think shape the way you produce content?
I think probably the largest impact, the two largest impacts, is my interaction with people. I've had a lot of jobs over the years. A whole lot of jobs. I think my record was 24 jobs in one summer. It was absolutely ludicrous.
Because you kept getting fired because you were having fun, or
no? I would just quit. I would go get a job.
I'm bored. I'm moving on.
Yeah, I remember once I worked at Red Lobster. I was a junior cook. I got hired to be a junior cook at Red Lobster, and man, the head chef guy was just screaming at me constantly, like all Friday night, all Saturday night. And suddenly I was like, to hell with this, I'm not going in. And he called. I remember I was in the bathtub when he called, and I answered, and he said, "Hey, your shift has begun." I said, "Nah, I'm quitting." "Why are you quitting?" My feet hurt. I don't know. Whatever. Pick one. I don't care. Whatever. And that ended when I joined the Army. But yes. When I was having that number of jobs and that different type of jobs, I was a photographer for a little while. I did a dead collection for a while. I mean, it's just all kinds of goofy crap. I managed Amazios. I mean, it's just whatever. Whoever would hire me, I would go do it. But you meet a lot of interesting people, right? I mean, there's so many. Everyone out there has their own story and their own background and their own interactions and their own experiences, and you don't get that in just kind of an everyday. Even with friendships, sometimes you don't get it. But when you're really strangers thrown together just for a little while, there's sometimes these quirks come out. You can see. I don't know. It's very interesting. So I've always enjoyed people watching and kind of learning a little bit about people. So when you're in my games or the stuff that I write, NPCs play an absolutely gigantic role, as they do in the stuff like that when I'm writing content for it. And then the second thing is weather. I follow this Ferdinand Brauddel's school of history that begins with terrain, language, and so forth and so on. So the environment within which people live shapes the way you communicate, which shapes the way you think, which shapes the way your cultures develop, and all of that stuff. So I'm very aware of when I'm writing. I'm very aware of if there's a ridge line here, that this tribal group's going to be impacted by that ridge line itself. So probably terrain and weather is the next thing that kind of rolls into it.
So the if then this then what cycle that sometimes people shortcut and skip, and then it shows. So you mentioned that you were in the Army already. So we ask all of the veterans this, but how do you feel like your time in uniform affects the way you tell stories through your games?
Well, definitely my time in the Army had a huge impact on me. I joined up. I remember, again, a lot of my life's moments occur in the bathtub. I enjoy a good bath. So I was laying in the bathtub. We had just begun sending troops, first Gulf War, sending troops over there. Saddam was still in Kuwait. I'm looking at the paper, and I don't know what job I was working at the time. God knows what. It was during that summer, and there's these guys in the 82nd Airborne Division that are deploying, and I'm like, what am I doing? So I folded the paper up, got out, drove down to the recruiting station, joined the Army. So I did that. So, but then the Gulf War ended before I got out of training. So I ended up going to Hawaii, and I spent 2.5 years. The rest of my 3 years in, I spent in Hawaii at Schofield Barracks. And it was, I don't know, it was a great time. I absolutely loved it. The people you meet, talking about characters that you meet, the Army's absolutely filled with characters. I mean, it was just really cool. But I think that the way that it impacted my studies when I was in school too, is the ways armies actually logistics, how important logistics is and important supply is. And again, how much terrain factors into, I think I was talking about on my stream today, how insanely difficult it is to actually cross a river. And so when I was in the Army, all of that was brought home, in force. So that from that experience is what really kind of relates over and into my writing.
So normally we ask if you draw on people you serve with in the military when you create, like when you write characters in your novels, but you almost leave so much of character generation up to the individual players because you're creating the template for them to play. But do you ever let them the personalities of the people you knew factor into some of the pre-generated stuff or the NPCs or any of that stuff?
I probably did in the early days. I don't do that too often. I'll take quirks and like there was the first when I first got assigned to 125th Transportation, whatever headquarters unit, whatever there in Hawaii. The guy that was put in charge of me, cannot remember his name. He was an E4, and he went down to show me how to, PMCS. Is that the right word? Man, it's been way too long. Yeah, the truck, and he gets on the little rolling cart thing, and he goes under the deuce and a half, and I'm standing there, and he's talking for a minute, and he goes quiet as he's doing whatever he's doing, and so his boots are sticking out and straight up, and after like a minute of him being quiet, the boots just kind of go to the side, real slow, and I thought, what? And I looked under it, and he's sound asleep. I thought,
no, Loke, I've used that maneuver myself.
Yeah, it was awesome. So stuff like that definitely just swings into when I'm creating stuff.
If you hadn't have told me he was an E4, I'd have known just by that. Specialist gonna specialist. So yep. Does your time in uniform affect the way you engage with content as a reader? You hit it a little bit when you said you began to appreciate just what was involved in crossing certain terrain features, but does it otherwise affect the way you engage with content?
What do you mean?
So like, the first questions were how your military service affects the way you create stuff. This one is more asking, flipping it from the side, because obviously if you're not just a creator, you read the stories, you watch the movies, you play the games. Does it affect the way you engage with content from the consumer angle?
Well, it's the logistics side of that thing. Trollord Games is a pretty active company. So having been attached to, I was in the 45th support group, attached to 25th Trans, what the hell is transportation? I can't remember all that. But anyways, I dated a girl from the supply side. So I just remember the supply side of things quite a bit. And I think that definitely has played into the way I organize how we order all of this, keeping, because man, with the print shop, we've got paper, glue, spare parts for all three pieces of equipment, the cutter and the binder, everything. So keeping stuff supplied, especially in today's current, definitely what I picked up in the service definitely plays into the way. And I organize my space. I like my space organized so that I've got kind of command of what's going on. I don't like disorder around me. Things get, and I definitely learned this, or it was reinforced in the Army. Things get out of hand very quickly, even if you don't do anything. So it's best to try to control it in the beginning if you possibly can.
So do they ever, like your employees ever mess with you and like just move your stuff around just to see your head flip a gasket?
No, it pretty much irritates me. But now it's on the flip of that. So Mark Sandy, now he's left the company. He ran the print shop for like 10 years, a good friend of mine. But I didn't get into Mark's space. Mark produced what he was supposed to produce, on time. He did a fantastic job. He just got burned out, printing and binding and manufacturing books. But I could not stand going into that print shop. There was crap everywhere. He wouldn't throw anything away. Scrap of, and there's a lot of scrap. So he wouldn't throw that stuff away. There was just pile. I might be able to use that on something. No, you won't. But I'm not going to throw it away. So they don't really mess with my space. And Chuck does a little bit. Now Chuck messes with me a little bit, but and yeah, and Mark, I just didn't mess with Mark. So we found this nice equilibrium. When he did leave the company, though, I went out there and cleaned house. I just threw so much stuff away.
Recycled, of course.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's paper, so it's easy to recycle. You throw it in and haul it off.
Well, since this is sort of a unique interview for the podcast, and since we're interviewing the creator of a small indie game company, can you tell us exactly and tell our viewers what Trollord Games publishes?
So our primary product is Castles and Crusades. Castles and Crusades is a fantasy role-playing game powered by what we call the Siege Engine, and that's an attribute check system that's extraordinarily simple to use and learn, and it powers all of the flagship products, and that includes the Player's Handbook, the Castle Keeper's Guide, the Monsters and Treasure. It includes a whole series of hardback books on World Mythos, Codex Slavorum, Codex Keltarum. What are the other ones? There's Classicum. There's a whole bunch of them. There's 6 or 7 of them. And then we've got a whole line of support books that go with Castles and Crusades as well. The Adventurer's Backpack, Home of the Unclean. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And then about 100 adventures, I guess, somewhere around in there. Secondly, we publish Amazing Adventures, which uses the Siege engine as well. And that's a modern multi-genre game. So anything else that's not fantasy falls into the Amazing Adventures. It has a Star Siege component, a horror component, all this other stuff that goes with that. And then we support 5th edition as well. We've got a line of adventures for 5th edition, and that's the Kickstarter we're doing now. We've got an adventure path that we've got on Kickstarter. And then beyond that, we do fiction and a variety of smaller things, support books, stuff like that.
So for those listening who are just from the nerdy reading side, and we love you too, but the 5e he's referring to is 5e Dungeons and Dragons. So when you hear 5e, he's shorthanding that. So, and if you're into reading the fantasy, it can be fun to play the characters yourself. So give gaming a try.
Yeah. And on that note, let's talk about 5th edition and the Undying War Kickstarter. So where did you get the premise for the universe of Arid, and how'd you come up with the setting?
So Arid is our setting. That's the lands of Ursul behind me on the map that the Codex of Arid covers. I started playing back in 1976, and somewhere in 80 or 79 or whatever it was, Davis picked up the World of Greyhawk Folio, which is this small 1-book 2-map folder edition of the World of Greyhawk. I fell in love with it immediately, began playing World of Greyhawk, played that forever and a day. When I joined the army, it was before we knew the war would end so fast. So no one knew it was going to happen. So we ended our 10-year game. We said, okay, we're just going to stop here. The game is over, move on. And I ended it in this kind of apocalyptic moment when this dark god is summoned to the world and all that. Well, fast forward 6 months and I'm in Hawaii sitting on the beach doing absolutely nothing. I started writing. I started to take this world that the content that we had created in Greyhawk, and create my own world. I first wrote a novel about it. I can't remember the name of this, The Undying Song, I think, something like that. And it was essentially, I took the dark god and made a story around him and created this whole kind of this narrative. It's not The Undying. I can't remember what that thing's called. And I created this whole narrative story. And then from that, I thought, there was no email, so we were sending letters back and forth. I need to get the game started again. I'm going to be out in a few years. We can start doing this. So I essentially advanced time 1,000 years from when the characters ended, and they're going to be able to play their same characters because they were in a various states of resurrection or whatever. There was a whole storyline that went into that stuff. And I wrote a bunch of letters to these guys, to my players. This is the way the world's evolved. This is what this is. And that left Greyhawk completely behind. And that's where this world really began to form and take shape. And then we played in that world. Once I got out of the service in 93, we played in that world for 6-7 years. When we started the company in 99, I had this really formed world with maps and, societies and all of this other mess. And that's when Max said, hey, we need a 4th book. So I created the 4th book for our first printing job. And that was the World of Arid when it first actually became, when it came to print. So when you talk about your earlier questions about what kind of went into my fantasy creation and all of that fantasy that I had been reading, and a little bit of sci-fi, but mostly fantasy since the early 70s and through the 80s and into the 90s, all of this stuff is germinating, and it's given me ideas, and it's opened up, whole avenues of thought and conceptualized fairies and magic and, all kinds of stuff, dwarves, elves, all of it. And it began to and all of that, I began to coalesce and spill into the world. So then the World of Arid was born when the little book, the little 24-page book sold so well, we needed a bigger book. And again, we had a contract with the printer. If we sent 2 hardcovers at the same time, we'd get a discount. And we were doing Gary Gygax's Canting Crew. So we took my stuff and I wrote the Codex of Arid, which is in its present form now. And then we rolled those out. So that created the World of Arid. And in the World of Arid, there's a section. So I don't want to go into the whole history of it. I could ramble about that for a while, but there was a period in Arid where the Empire of Aenoch existed and it controlled most of the world. Well, that was destroyed by the Dark God. And then when the Dark God's overthrown and thrown out, this small little remnant of people that are Enochians create what they call New Aenoch. And this is on the map over here. And this is kind of the remnants of this ancient civilization that has survived the 1,000-year reign of the Dark God. Well, right in there is this. It's really ripe for adventure. It's designed for the Empress, is what she's called. She has a very tiny empire, but she's called the Empress. She's called for crusades, for any kind of adventurers to come over and reconquer her kingdom. That's the whole thing. Everyone come here. If you fight for the Empress, you'll get to own your own land, swear fealty, move on, and the hopes being to create this empire. And that's what kind of fuels this region, which is just south of the main tower where the Dark God ruled, where Blacktooth Ridge is. Now, so all of that's in column A, and in column B, when we did Castles and Crusades in 2006, 2005. It released in 4 and officially released in 5. Davis wrote, we needed an adventure for it. And I was managing the company at the time. Mac had left, so we needed an adventure. So Davis wrote Assault on Blacktooth Ridge, which is A1. And that takes place in New Aonach, just south of the Dark Tower. And then we needed a series. So he wrote A2, A3, A4, and this took a few years. By the time he wrote A3, he really began to formulate this larger epic campaign that involves Alfstrag and the Dark God trying to come back from, the void and all this other stuff. And that played into, I took over the series at A10, I think. He wrote about half of A10, and I wrote the rest of it, and then A11, A12. And all of that played into what is now the Undying War. It begins very simply with your characters not knowing what's going on. You're just adventuring. You're just looking to gain land or wealth or whatever. And by, chapter 3 or chapter 4, you're getting embroiled in this larger conflict that's going on.
And on that note, tell us a little bit more about the Kickstarter itself, what your goal is, and the challenges you're looking at converting it from CNC to 5th edition.
So 5th edition, I did not get a good grasp on 5e when we began publishing it. We were deeply involved in Castles and Crusades, and we got into 5th edition, and I didn't take the time to sit down and kind of really study the approach Wizards of the Coast was taking with this game, and more importantly, the approach that players were adopting to. So we released a whole bunch of adventures, which included the A series and single adventures, just like, was done back in the 1980s. And not until about a year and a half ago, when I got on TikTok and I started following a lot of 5e TikTokers and watching how they play and what they're doing, I'm thinking, oh, we're formatting our books wrong for these guys. They're gaming a little bit differently than I do, which is fantastic. I think it's great. It's a gigantic tent. Everybody game however you want to game. There's no wrong way or right way to game. It's crazy to me to think that, but I began to look, and a lot of these groups were running these adventure paths for like a year or 2 years, and then they're done, and then they start another one with a different group, different players or whatever. And I thought, no, this is really cool. This is very different than the way I do it. And we need to revisit some of the stuff that we're doing for 5th edition. Well, this dovetailed with an extraordinarily ever-growing aggravation I've had over the past decade with our maps. The maps are all over the board. You can see Peter Bradley's done most of them. You can see his style changing as he would change stuff mid-stride. So in like A1, you've got this type of map, and in A7, you've got this type of map. And he and I never got a real good control over that. So that I was Chuck and I were working hard on getting that managed when I decided, we need to revisit the A series. It's a fantastic series that is one of the things we didn't push. There's a romance involved with this series. There's epic play involved with this series. There's so many things that weren't pushed in the smaller books because it's kind of the way I play. It's kind of, you do whatever you want. You don't need.
It's kind of more of a sandbox approach. Familiar. I'm not that familiar with 5e, but it seems to me the adventure paths are a little more structured versus like I just got 2 more of the A series box sets today, and I love them, but I see the approach difference. It's like, here's the setting, here's some NPCs, here's their goals, here's some encounters. Have fun.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. and I'm not in any way criticizing. I think it's great. I have played many sandbox and many what are they when they very structured adventures. So either way, it's cool. And I have to tell you, I'm running a game now. I've been running it since 06, and they've just made it to 15th level. And this is 10 years or whatever, 14. It's ridiculous. We need to play some different characters.
Yeah. I'm kind of in that position too.
Yeah. So in a way, the adventure paths are kind of cool. You play it, you're done, do another one, so I really like the concept of it, but the way the A series was presented originally in 5e and even in CNC, it's not built this way at all. It's really built for the sandbox approach. You're going to take it, run with it, and kind of weave your own thematic stuff into it, and so forth and so on. So what I'm going to do, I've already begun in the Undying War, which is A0 through A12. I'm going to go in and structure it. I'm going to lay out the actual adventure path, with Coburg, the romance, the Vessel of Souls, the Lady of Garoon, all of that stuff, so that the DM can actually see, okay, this is the arc that we're doing here. Now, what they do with it is, go. But that's the real plan there. And then bring in new maps, a whole new art, the whole thing.
So speaking of art, before we do that, I am going to show the cover art for this. So how did you come up with this art style? It definitely looks a lot like, a modern artistic take on what we saw from some of the original gaming content with the style of the image. But how'd you come to this as your cover?
So this is a piece by Zoe DeVos. And when I work with Zoe, it's just a pure pleasure. Now, I what I do with all the artists, there's 3 main artists that we work with and a few ancillary, but it's Jason Walton, Peter Bradley, and Zoe DeVos. And I'm pretty open. I'll just say I need a knight on a staircase. I need a battle scene or whatever. And I let them go. I have so rarely, it's got to be less than 5 or 6 images that I have rejected and said, I need something different. Because I found when you let an artist go, like in this case, Zoe, when you let them go, their imagination is every bit as vibrant as ours. And if you don't restrict it, in my experience, you tend to get something a little bit freer, a little bit more epic. And when Zoe sent me this piece over, I was like, oh my God, this is absolutely beautiful. It's got this understated realism in it that I just feel like when I'm looking at Zoe's art, I don't know, it's like almost like not a photograph, but it's something real that I'm a part of. It's not just fantasy art. So this became the cover for the Undying War. I had commissioned it from Zoe for something else. I can't remember what. But that project fell through, so it had been sitting in my unused covers folder for a while. And then when I started formulating the idea of the adventure path, I was thinking, oh my God, I gotta get Zoe's piece out because this is absolutely perfect for it. And then Zoe's the one that is doing the whole book, all of the art. Jason will be doing some of it, but Zoe's hand's going to be on all the art throughout the book.
All right. And so before we dive too deeply into the Kickstarter and the Undying War, we're going to take a moment and shamelessly shill for the man.
Through murder, through treachery, he rose. You trusted him. All wished his demise. Reckless and cruel, loved through hate. Coburg the Undying, High Lord of Ulfstra. He longed for more, for power, for love. But she was gone, taken from him. But he would have it all. Power and his love, and the world his yoke, and his war. The road to hell begins with the first step. The Undying War, a 5th edition adventure path for 1st through 13th level characters that brings an evolving storyline to your table. Pulling your adventures into an epic tale, they will journey over land, through dungeons, towns, castles, and even to other planes of existence. With countless NPCs and endless hours of play, immerse yourself and your players in the world of Aird and Coburg's Undying War. Your journey begins in the simple town of Botkenberg and ends before the gates of hell, from monsters more mundane to beasts of legend. The Undying War, live on Kickstarter. Pledge today and join us at the table. Trollord Games, join the fray.
Chuck did a good job with that video.
He did. Chuck's got a beautiful voice, and he did a fantastic job with that video.
I like the ending where you got the rock coming down. That was kind of nice.
I love that part. I absolutely love that part.
You could have almost cut right before that when he said join the fray. You could have cut it there. And
Yeah.
I thought about it, but I'm like, that rock is just too cool. I know I'm a nerd, but I had to leave it.
You're a rock nerd, JR.
It's geology, man. Geology rocks.
That's right.
Oh God! Remind me to deduct 500 XP if you ever play with me again.
Yeah. So we were talking in the pre-show, Sparky and I, while we were getting everything set up, and he mentioned that you guys do something a little bit special for active and former military. So can you elaborate on what Trollord Games does for veterans and active duty people?
Yeah, absolutely. We offer a flat 50% discount for anything in the store. All you have to do is reach out. We actually got a bot system that will help this. A lot of veterans have reached out and they'll send their 214 to us. And they don't need to send that. We have a few very simple questions. I'm suspicious enough about all things that document doesn't need to be floating around anywhere.
Yeah.
It just makes me a little nervous. But we have a few very simple questions for active duty, and it's Coast Guard, Marines, Army, Air Force, Navy, U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Western Europe. And just reach out to us, and you ask you these questions, and you'll get this automatic discount code, and you get 50% off anything you order from the store. It's not much. We can't do a lot. I know that veterans are suffering, tremendously all over the country, going through a hellacious time, and we can't do much for that. But we hope that helps a little bit. And then alternatively, if you are part of or know of any veterans organization that's helping veterans deal with PTSD or whatever it is, or just even veteran clubs or clubs on base or on an aircraft carrier, wherever you happen to are, give us a shout and we'll ship you books. When we were active over in Afghanistan and Iraq, the policy was all you had to do was send us an email and we'll send your unit a whole bunch of game books to play free of charge. We cover the shipping, the whole 9 yards. Yeah, so we did that quite a bit. And we obviously we're not as active bouncing around though I know we are in places. So just give us a shout. We will try to take care of you as best we can.
So on that vein, and this is I didn't see anything on your website about it, but if somebody, because we've got a lot of people that like to support the military and they don't always know how, and this was a way they wanted to, is there any way they could do some sort of like, I would like to sponsor somebody so you can send something to a veteran or an active unit? Is that an option?
Oh, we that's not written out there, but that'd be fantastic. We would more than happily do that. If someone reached out and said, "Hey, I would like to do X," we'd be more than happy to do that. We will work with just about anybody who's legitimately trying to help veterans weather the mess that they're going through. So we're more than happy to do something like that.
Okay.
And I don't want to sit here and disparage all the veterans are going through a mess. They aren't. My father was a Vietnam veteran, and I'm a veteran, and my brothers, both of them served. But some had different experiences and different outcomes. So it's all over the spectrum. So we do whatever we can.
So now we're gonna focus wholly on the 5e Kickstarter because that's what you got running at the moment. Obviously Kickstarters allow you to back at several levels, from just a simple PDF, for just a simple, hey, I'm supporting you and it's not enough to buy a book, but I just want to throw some money, to, I buy all the things plus all the swag. So what levels are available for people if they wanted to participate? And obviously the link will be in the show notes, dear listener.
So the easiest level is the digital level where you just get a digital copy of the book. I think that's $19 or $15. The book itself will be about 350 pages, full color, give or take, with this slew of maps. If you've already purchased this stuff and you don't want the new stuff, there's a map level that you can just buy the maps. And then I think that's where Sparky is.
Yeah. Actually, I kicked in for the 5e one because I want to see the art and what you've done with it. So,
okay.
I supported this.
Thank you, but that art's amazing. I got it. Zoe's just knocking it through the park. Jason too. And from there we go to just the book and the PDF, and I think that one's $60 for the two of them. The book will retail at $59.99, so that's essentially you're getting the PDF for free. at that level. And then the $99 level has all of that plus a lot of content from this world map you see on the back behind. So the adventure path itself takes you from the Droonberry River up to the Fruson River to Botkenberg, and then across the Blighted Screed and up the Imperial Highway through the swamp to Graphica, down the. It's a long journey, a long journey, and there's lots of terrain features along the way. So the $99 level comes with 2 more books that cover all of these terrain features with adventure hooks and all kinds of stuff in case your characters wander off the path, and do whatever players are always doing. It's everybody's game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mind controlled by cucumbers, for example.
Exactly. Yeah.
As you do.
As happens occasionally. Then there's that. And then the next level, I think, has the 5th edition Monsters and Treasures of Aird. That we've previously published, and then the last one has all of that plus a nice leather version of the book for the collectors out there.
Okay.
And there's a retailer level as well. If you have a retail shop, there's a level for that too.
So for people that just like all the pretty art posters and such, and they have room, is that something that will be available for sale at some point? Some of the graphics, because I could see some of your covers would make awesome posters on a wall too.
Yes, we actually work with Noble Dwarf, a great company, and these guys do really cool. They'll do just kind of like regular posters, and I've got one order. I haven't got it yet, but they also have canvas. So like you can get some of our books in a canvas print, which is really nice.
And they do look
they're
nice.
Just amazing. And they'll do them wall size. They'll do it. It's like 12 by 18 and then a bigger one. And then it's wall size madness, but it's really cool. And then they do coffee mugs and all that other stuff. And we've been working with them for about a year. So we got most of it. And as this art becomes available, we'll start feeding it in that direction so people can kind of build their own and what have you. It's because it's really good art. I am guilty as a publisher. And we've gotten a little bit of flack about this over the years. I'll recycle art a lot because I know that Peter does this fantastic piece for a book that sells 278 copies. And then for whatever reason, it just dies. Well, that piece of art doesn't need to die. I pull it, put it in another book, and people can enjoy it there as well.
No, I get that. Like, just from an artistic standpoint, when you have something that you are really proud of, you definitely want people to look at it or read it or whatever. So, like, I totally understand when, like, that kind of stuff happens. You see a lot of that with people that write short content. Like, they might write something for an anthology, and the anthology might flop, but they're like, man, I really love my story. I want people to read it. Like, this is the same principle. So I definitely get it.
Yeah,
so,
and there's no reason for it to just languish, gone forever. That's nutty.
Absolutely. So does the 5e system support miniatures for people that prefer to play that way?
Yes, and we're actually working on a VTT pledge level stretch reward on this one. But yeah, so there'll be miniatures are easy to integrate with this, just about any kind of content.
You got my attention.
So and what's a VTT for people that don't know?
So that's virtual tabletop. I'm kind of new to it myself. Chuck has been giving me a crash course on all of this stuff for about a year now. And there's several venues. So it's basically when you're playing online and you have like maps in front of you and you can move tokens around on a map and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. Like Roll20, you got light. If you have your torch on it, it only lights parts of the map that your torch would cover. I'm sure they all do that, but it's just kind of cool stuff. And we're pretty active on Fantasy Grounds, which is one of the companies we're working on. Roll20 should have that in the next few weeks active. And then there's Shard and there's another one, the Foundry that we're working with as well. So we're hoping to kind of round all of this off in the next week or so. So that will be Chuck and I's tomorrow morning meeting.
So what about like the actual plastic crack that people who actually like are playing in person? Is that an option as well?
We don't have that built into this Kickstarter, but we're very good friends with the folks over at Reaper. They're just very good people. We, for years and years and years, we haven't in the last year or two since COVID really, but we would send them boxes of books we published and they would send us boxes of miniatures that they made. So it was this, nice trade
relationship.
Yeah, it was very nice. So yeah, we always send people to Reaper. And I know that Davis, who does a lot of writing for us, and he wrote a lot of the Undying War, he is a gigantic Reaper fan. He's the one that started that whole trade back in like 2001 or something.
Does that mean he gets all the minis and
Oh,
you
yes.
never get to see any of them?
He's got so many miniatures, and he's a good painter, and he painted for the longest while, but he hadn't painted forever. So like he got Bones, I think Bones 2, those Reaper Kickstarters, and they're just in boxes, half put together. Like we all do.
He just needs more steam in that engine. It'll work fine in a few weeks, I'm sure. So the for the maps, like what level of detail of the maps are there? Is it just the generic world map, like what we see behind you? Are there actual like environmental and terrain maps for like the dungeon or the castle or what have you?
So that's the really nice thing about what we're doing now. And when there's the whole companies, all of our products are going through this transition. The A series is just getting it at the moment. We used to do just kind of the generic, here's your room, like the maps from the AD&D days. Here's your room, here's the tunnel, here's the hallway, what have you. And then you read the room description to see what's in it. No, you really can't do that on VTT. They kind of need to know if there's a wheelbarrow in there, they need to know so that as they move their token around, they're going to bump into it or what have you. So Bill Edmonds, we hired him about 6 months ago, and Bill has been overhauling the entire A series maps, and he's putting that level of detail in there. If there's a brazier in the room, it's in the map. So he's putting all the beds, all of that stuff in the room. It's not like completely 3D, but it's got all of that content in there that it makes it almost feel that way. His maps are absolutely astounding. We have one, I think, up on the Kickstarter.
Yeah, I saw that. That's why I asked, because I thought it'd be nice to talk about. So with the virtual tabletops with the VTTs, if you have the brazier or the sconce or whatever that would emit light, does that factor that in as far as what portions of the rooms are revealed?
I'm going to guess yes, but
Sparky,
I don't know.
You use a lot of those.
I use Foundry. In my case, I will have to manually enter the light source, but it's not a big deal. I know now it might be different for Fantasy Grounds and some others, because some of them, I know some of the maps can be done where that stuff is automatically factored in, and it's literally plug and play. But knowing where the actual light source are supposed to be on the map is very helpful, because when you're sitting there setting the maps up, you don't have to go and like, okay, where's a logical place for a torch? Where's a logical? You're just like, okay, I see a picture of a lantern there. I'm slapping a 20-foot radius or whatever on it and calling it good.
So one of the things I noticed about a lot of the game content out there, as someone who was looking, so I came to this crazy thing. My son had been into a medical facility getting treatment for one of his health issues, and one of the staff had started playing with him, and it was just a made-up game, ad hoc. Like I imagine most of the first games were. Like it was a mesh of everything you could think of, from submachine guns to wizards with swords, right? And so he came back to me and he said, "Daddy, I like this. I really want to do this." And so I started looking around, and there's a lot of people that want to play, not a lot of people that want to dungeon master. So that's the first general barrier to entry, right? And so I'm like, well, I'll just learn to dungeon master so I can do it with the kids and bonding, whatever. And it's therapists will tell you it's really good for kids on the spectrum. It helps them learn to be empathetic and sympathetic to other people. It actually is a whole reign of thought that uses these as social stories in therapy. And so I was like, I'll just learn to do it myself. So I started reading a lot of these manuals, and I noticed they're written on the assumption that you already know what the heck you're doing.
Yes.
And I ran into that a lot. It's just like cookbooks when you're starting to learn to cook. Like all of them assume like, all this lingo, right? Like you're coming in with this base of knowledge, and not many of them are set up for, like, I literally just decided this sounds cool, let me try. So are your books with Troll Lord Games, and more specifically like this 5e Kickstarter, the Undying War, are they sort of set up where they're friendly for a new player that wants to dive in, and this would be their first foray into tabletops?
They are, but probably not nearly as enough as they need to be. So if you get in the player's handbook, the last part of the player's handbook is kind of a how-to section. It talks about styles of play, how to get started. It gives you an example of play and stuff like that. But I really do think, I've played this game forever, and just a perfect story of how I got started is exactly what you're talking about, because when we first got exposed to Dungeons and Dragons, it's going to be like 1975 or 6, somewhere around in there. My dad was in the service, and one of his soldiers was going on a hardship tour to Korea. So he had to get rid of everything. And he had these 5 or 6 or whatever it is, little brown books, D&D books that he had to get rid of. And he gave them to my mother. Now, I remember this exchange. I was in the parking lot when it happened. And she went on to give these books to Davis as a Christmas or birthday gift. I can't remember which one. Because Davis and I did a whole lot of wargaming. We played a lot of Avalon Hill games in those days. I was like 10 when I was doing all that, 10 or 9 or whatever. And so I asked Davis not long ago, I said, I don't actually remember. I thought we started in 76 or 77. I don't really remember when we started. When did this happen? He goes, well, Mom gave me the books in 75 or whatever year it was. And I looked at them and I had no idea what any of this meant. So I put them in the closet and there they sit for 6 months. and I think he had read something in either Epic or Heavy Metal or Dragon magazine, something, I don't know, somewhere in the, in that space of time, he read something, or maybe he pulled it out and thought about it and began to study it. And then he rolled up a bunch of characters and gave me these 6 characters and said, name these guys. And the first one I named was Tarzan. And then we started playing. So the barrier is pretty, I think it's not intuitive. Let's put it that way. I don't think it's that intuitive.
I have to wonder if it's like a game designer, if it, game designers usually they're going to have all this experience, years and years of running games. And I would imagine it's kind of difficult to get back on the level of making it understandable for new, because my God, that's, like 20, 30 years ago or longer for some people. It's kind of like in the early days of computing, we had, these thick manuals that told you how to run early Windows and DOS, and it was just over the heads of most people. That's why, right. Books for Dummies was a multi-million-dollar industry for 20 years until the internet, came along. And that's something I always think about if I'm trying to teach someone to play. I'm like, okay, where was I at this point? Granted,
right.
It wasn't that long ago for me. My experience is pretty short, but still, it's hard to. I would think it's kind of hard to put yourself back in those positions.
It is. It's fine. And because I didn't start, Davis started running the game. When I started running the game in 81 or 80 or whatever the hell that was, I knew how to do it because I've been playing under him for 4 years. So for me, it was an easy transition. Much like my Army career, it was just kind of easy. It worked out for me.
Well, you've had all these other jobs, so I mean, you have a little bit of here and there, and like, it'll all work out.
But one of the most recently, I would say in the last year, the question I get asked the most on my Twitch streams or in emails or wherever is, how do you start world building? Which is essentially, how do you start to run a game? That's essentially what that question is. And I think that young players today they actually have it tougher than we did. We kind of were going at it back in the 70s. We didn't know what. There's no doing it wrong because it's just you and your buddies, right? No one's going to tell you that's how you don't. You whatever. There
wasn't any preconceived notions about all.
There were no games lawyers, is what he said.
Yeah, there's no
or law lawyers or other things that we do not want, subjects we don't want to get into.
Yeah, there's none of it, and you're just playing with your friends, and so there's no one's going to write you a letter from another state saying you're doing that wrong. But now with YouTube and Twitch, wherever everybody's gaming, and they call it the Mercer effect or whatever. How can I game that much? And then you've got, how can I run a game as well as these professionals or whatever you want to call them? And then on the flip of that, the world building stuff is crazy because I've read, half a dozen articles, blog posts by people that quit the game or are very frustrated and want to quit because they can't get their worlds formed and working and all of that stuff. And I'm reading this stuff going, this isn't really about world building. That's a side effect. World building is great, and you're going to accidentally world build, no matter what you do, because it's just the nature of as you build a game around it. And so you really don't need to worry about all of that. So the question I get when people ask, how do you begin building your world? How do you begin? And it's the same thing. Beginning the world, beginning the game is the same thing. And it's just keep it simple. And I try to explain to people, keep it so very, very simple. And I got a whole kind of lecture now that I do. But you're right, Sparky, because it's hard to kind of take a step back and go, okay, they don't know to begin the story, that they're not only are they crafting the story, but they're crafting the story with other people, but they're also adjudicating. It's not intuitive. It's just, I don't think it's intuitive. So I think that to answer your question, JR, I think it's in there in the player's handbook, and I think it's decent, but I probably need to sit down and write just a a pamphlet, 18 pages, 20 pages of just some tips.
So something like you might get in the rules light version, which for those of you who don't know, is like the preview of the game. It's enough that you could sit down and play for a level or two, but you're gonna need to purchase it to get more. Generally, it's like a free sample to get you, an idea of what's out there. But it's that pamphlet approach to explain games. I found those really helpful when I was getting started.
And I'll say this: your GM tricks of the trade. I mean, whether it's the Patreon list or just the stream you do every week, that has been immensely helpful to solving some real perplexing questions and problems. And
I'm glad because it's one of those things. I mean,
you could write a book on that whole subject easily.
Well, we are eventually going to take all, because it's 520. It's a lot.
Yeah, I've been reading like 20 or 30 of them a week or something, and
yeah, it's a lot, and I think we've got them all in the database, and I think it's like $1 on the Patreon, you get access to all of them.
Yeah.
So because it's a lot, there's a lot that goes into it, and I've watched so many DMs just beat themselves up over stuff that you just can't control, because players are crazy. They're just they're just crazy,
and it's
which is good though.
Every table is different. Like you never know. Yes. Like I figured I played with James Ward at that Crimson Hawk that we mentioned in the beginning, and he was DM for a while, and then Walt took over. Walt Robillard DM'd, and then James played. And so I'm like, okay, I've played some games. I know exactly how these players are going to react. And so you set these situations up and you give them the perfect hook. Like, yeah, that's cool and all, but I'm going over here in the left field. And I'm like, crap, I didn't prepare anything over there. And so it's one of those things where, like, not just every system is going to be different. Every setting is going to affect it differently. And then every group at the table.
Swapping one person out for like one session a week, there's completely changes the dynamic.
And you can't judge. I remember probably one of the most shocked. I was running a game for kids. They're all under like 10 or 11 or something. There's 6 or 7, 8 of them. I don't know. And we're all having a blast, but they're traveling and they've got rations, and I'm keeping track of how much food they eat. And this goobly goop. Well, they run out of food. And at one point they killed an orc.
And
I do what?
The Donner Party.
Well, this is what this young girl who's probably 8 or 9.
Oh my gosh.
They killed an orc, and I mentioned, they loot the orc or whatever, and I can't remember what I said, but something like, now you guys remember you're out of food. And she goes without missing a beat, I eat the orc.
Hey, orcs taste like pork.
I guess. I don't know. I guess if you're starving, you can eat an orc. I had never thought about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I saw that coming because we literally just did a session on Monday, and we had them. It was started as a dungeon that was just Easter themed because they started them the week after, or the Monday after Easter. And I'm like, we'll clear a dungeon in a session. No, it doesn't work that way. By the way, people pacing is a thing.
No.
And so now they've got this dungeon full of rabbits that they're fighting, and the ranger's like, yeah, I don't want to run out of food. We're totally eating this giant rabbit.
Yeah.
Okay. You're eating the Easter Bunny. Thanks. Way to give us nightmares.
Yeah. Then I'm in that game, and we ran into these mushroom creatures. I'm like, JR, have you planned for the possibility that one of us decides to eat one of the mushrooms?
Yeah, the Shrieker. It's in the Sword of Wizardry.
Like, no, I haven't. Like, okay, I'm not going to be mean to you.
Now
I'm either going to have a good hallucination or I'm going to die from poison.
So now adding it to the Dungeon Master, Game Master, Castle Keeper is like, what happens if the player eats X? You got to have an answer, because now it's going to happen every time you turn around. Right. So speaking of that, so I found when I was looking for support as a Dungeon Master before, Sparky actually joined my game to teach me how to do the Dungeon Master. So he's sort of side seat driving as a player. But there are a lot of channels that are popping up with advice for Dungeon Masters, sort of the professional DM set, but a lot of them are kind of either targeted too specifically at one specific system, or they're so broad that applying the advice becomes difficult. So what sort of support is Trollord Games going to offer as far as, I know you've got a Twitch channel, you got a YouTube channel. Are you going to do some of the how to plays and how to generate character, that kind of thing?
Yes, actually, it's one of the things Chuck and I are working on now. We got to figure the camera angle out, but we're going to try to do very short. I find that I use YouTube all the time. If I don't know how to fix something, piece of plumbing, electric, whatever, I go to YouTube, type it in, and some plumbers out there, thank God, has done a video on how to fix this thing.
Amen.
Yeah, exactly. But I always skip, the first minute because he's just jabbering about something that's not helping me. I know I shouldn't do that. I always like the video. I try to show my support.
Like, share, and subscribe, people. You do the thing.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So I'm going to try to keep them very short. We're going to do just a very brief how to roll a character, how to pick a name, how to start a game, anything like that, and keep them under like. Chuck kind of wants it a little bit longer. We'll figure this out. He wants them to be about 10 minutes. I'm thinking about 3 or 4. So if you got this, and it's sort of like the GM's tricks of the trade. The early ones they're not orderly, but the latter ones are all kind of subject driven. So it's 5 tricks on how to run an NPC, 5 tricks on this. So you can kind of go and read that kind of body of, work subject that you're concerned about. So what I'd like to do is have this series of videos that are very short. So if you need to know how to do, ideas on how to mess with shrieker mushrooms when your character eats them, whatever it is, it's just like 2 minutes. So you don't have to invest 30 minutes of listening.
Yeah, some of them videos are just so long.
They're
and we're in the age of TikTok. People, and you're like the most progressive guy in the RPG industry because you're on TikTok, and there's not a lot of others I think are.
Hey, let me tell you what's funny about that. So TikTok's average video is like a minute or something, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I enjoy TikTok. I'll sit there and stroll through TikTok. And if there's a TikTok that's over a minute, I just keep going.
Actually, it's your fault that I finally broke down because my girlfriend, she's all over TikTok, always sending me all these videos that I have to look at out of the app. And then you signed up, and I'm like, damn it, fine. I'm just going to get the app. Hell with it.
It's an entertaining venue.
Yeah, it really is. I hate to admit it, but it is.
Yeah.
It's good when you have absolutely nothing else to do.
She's been sending. We're in a shared Discord, Sparky and I, and some of our friends are. And there's we literally there's a whole sub channel for all the TikTok she finds for us, and some of the stuff like the reading book talk, I guess they call it, where people are finding some of the ways people describe things, and it's like, have they ever looked at insert X that they're describing? It's like they don't understand how any of that works, but they sure wrote about it. But so I have noticed that you guys, in addition to the TikTok, which I didn't realize you guys had, and I will add that to the show notes, people, you have a Twitch stream where you run some games. So if there are other people that are running games like Sparky does with his old time taverns that are running your system, is there any way they reach out to you so you can sort of make people aware it's there? They get views, you get content advertising. How does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chuck heads up all of our organized play and the Twitch streaming. So Chuck Cumbo's who you want to talk to on that. I believe you have to go through Tim. I think on the internet, we need to fix this actually. I think you got to go to product support. We're actually installing a bot system that's going to allow people to ask quick questions and just get email addresses and stuff like that. But yeah, so you want to get a hold of Chuck, and Chuck will get you on our channel or sponsor your channel. He's got a couple of programs that he's built around all of this stuff. He keeps explaining them to me. I don't know mostly what he's talking about.
Yeah,
but
he's told me about grand plans, and I went,
yeah, okay.
Just let me know.
But yeah, if you are running Castles and Crusades, we'd be more than happy to sponsor you with giveaways, prizes, stuff like that. Or if you want to run it on our channel, we're more than happy to entertain that as well. We're really trying to fill up the Twitch channel with just a lot of good content. Tim's working on a poetry reading. We've started Grace has started reading our fiction Thursday nights after my GMTT and Tim's World Anvil. So we're looking for a lot of content. So yeah, absolutely reach out.
So speaking of the Twitch channel, that's one of the things that I think it's worth mentioning. So sometimes you watch Twitch and you wonder if you fall off the dark end of the internet. On their Twitch channel, they actually, in addition to having some fun actual plays where you'll see Steve and Chuck and sometimes even Sparky gaming, they do giveaways through their Twitch channel. I actually won the Egypt Codex through
cool.
Just watching it. And in fact, I just downloaded that yesterday. So that's a cool thing. If you're into, you want to try it before you buy it and you watch in the channel anyway, you might win some free stuff because they're pretty liberal about doing free giveaways and such on their
Lots
channel.
of giveaways.
And I'm sure it's all a tax write-off, but I would hate to have to track all that for your poor accountant.
Yeah.
So
we sort of track it.
Track it-ish.
I've heard stories related to this issue, and they weren't good.
we don't want to give the accountants listening nightmares, so we'll just move on. So,
Right.
what? So you started the conversion of the air day. I'm probably butchering it.
I say aired, but I'm however people pronounce it, I'm more than happy. Whatever.
So what is next after the Kickstarter?
Yeah.
Is this a one and done for the 5e, or are you going to start expanding out this universe?
So the aired universe is actually system neutral. So, I primarily write content for it via Castles and Crusades. Most of the content I write for it is actually just system neutral. So if you played Dungeon Crawl Classics, you could take aired and play your DCC games in it. Swords and Wizardry, whatever, any OSR games, you can easily move into the world of aired. And now, as for supporting 5th edition, we have more coming out. Our next focus, we're going to shift back to the Siege Engine. That after this Kickstarter, sometime this summer, Jason and I were working on that today. We're going to do Amazing Adventures, which is our multi-genre game, modern game. Is a black and white book at the moment. I want to get that thing out in full color with a whole new layout, whole new art, whole shebang, and bring it into the modern world. So the next Kickstarter will be bringing Amazing Adventures. And then after that, I'm hammering on Planescapes. So we got just a lot of good content coming in.
So you've talked about the way the different styles of games are set up, with the way some of the more linear path of like a 5e style play versus the more sandbox that some of the old school games are. But as a designer, how do you go about creating that immersive world without stunning both the player and the game master?
So for the world setting, all I do when I write content for the world of air that's system neutral, I just lace it with adventure hooks, just tons of adventure hooks. So if I'm describing a terrain piece, say, I was describing an escarpment today. I take that escarpment and I just I think I've wrote that there's a fierce tribe of kobolds that live in there. Or you might write something like, this is where the Empress once had, she picnicked here once, and it was rumored that her shoes were lost, or anything like that. I'll weave stuff like that into the content so that the GMs, when they're reading it, can say, oh, I can take this idea and run with it. A perfect example of that, in the Codex of Aird, there's this rather epic scene where one of the gods slays one of the other gods, and her mist, the blood of her mist rises up. The evil god gathers this mist, forms it into a cloak, and then later, and he wears that cloak, the cloak of his sister, of her blood, as this artifact. Later, it's destroyed and scattered across the world. Well, one of the guys that I'm running in the Youngbloods game, he just happened to read that line that the cloak of red was scattered across the world from the dragon's fire, and he said, okay, this is completely out of the blue. He's like, this is what we're doing in this game. I said, well, what are we doing in it? Because I didn't even have anything planned yet. He's going, we're going to find the cloak of red. He's first level, and he's decided that his quest is to gather this artifact. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, on one hand, that's pretty cool, but on the other hand, that's what that's for, so that whoever's playing this content can yank these small adventure hooks out and do whatever they want with them, as little or as much that they want with them. Now, when it comes to the actual, like when I'm writing a Castles and Crusades adventure, that's a little trickier, because you don't want to railroad people, even on the adventure path. You don't want to make them go. You want them to kind of go in that direction. And that gets very tricky, because the railroading, just after you've been railroaded for, 2 or 3 chapters or adventures, however you want to look at it, you don't feel like you're playing your character.
I'm an adventurer, not a train hobo.
Exactly. And that's what you want to avoid. So it gets a little bit trickier. And I think that's where NPCs come in. NPCs, I think, is one of the most undervalued things that a GM has. An asset that they have to kind of control, guide, influence, encourage,
nudge
your players to go in a direction. So that part gets a little bit trickier, without a doubt.
So you mentioned the NPCs and such, and one of the things when Sparky was helping me set up some of the stuff for the gaming is we looked at support for game masters, and we found, and they don't even make it anymore, but there was a Swords and Wizardry put it out, but they're basically pre-generated cards, like random, this is the loot you find, or this is an NPC and these are the stats. Do you do any of that? I mean, it doesn't have to be like an index card like this was, but do you do any of that kind of stuff to help new game masters get into your system?
So we've got 2 books, 2 NPC almanacs. Each is about 250 pages long, and they're filled with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of NPCs. Just nice. An absolute mountain of NPCs. And the first book, what's it called? Sketches in the Register. The Register is just this essentially 250 pages of tables, and it's just it'll have the name, 3 words of a description, 3 words of a personality, hit points, it just your basic content that you need to run this innkeeper or the stable boy or whatever it is. So those two books bring so much NPC stuff. And the clever GM will figure out very, very quickly that they can interchange all of that content. So it's almost a limitless number of NPCs that you can pull out of these books. And ironically, we have not done it, and we need to finish it. It's almost done, but that's the last piece of that NPC Almanac Kickstarter was henchman cards. So we're
Nice.
we're wrapping those up soon, and we need that's literally the last piece of all those Kickstarters that I've been wrestling with for the past year. Of a henchman card. So it's funny and ironic that you asked that. So soon.
And I didn't know that you had those going. I just know, like, I'm thinking about it as someone who's a new game master and like what I'm working with and trying to figure out and what has helped me and what hasn't. And I've got lucky just partly because, working with Galaxy's Edge, and I've got access to Walt Robillard, who's like been gaming since like Christ was a corporal. And so he knows all the things and he can point me in all the directions. Right. And then, through that, I met Sparky. And like, so I've made contacts with people that help me. And in fact, I was in a Game Master Discord and I asked about maps because I was really struggling to get the map so I could like do the terrain because I suck at that. That's like, I'm not a cartographer, and I've tried the programs and they're not idiot proof. And if they are, they're not JR proof. And so I was asking and no one had an answer. And they're like, well, just think on it if you come up with something. So I'm writing a book with James Ward. I called James. I'm like, James, what do I do? I mean, you've written games, you know this stuff, right? And he's like, oh yeah, just use England. It's a small confined space, use the United Kingdoms and go from there. And then you can explore. And so I came back with my answer, and they were like, people in the comment section were like going like, if you had his phone number, why did you bother us? Like, that's cheating. Like, you're not supposed to be able to call directly to the king.
That's a cheat.
And they're like, oh, you're just name dropping. I'm like, crap. And I started thinking about like because of that experience and then branching outwards, how many people you meet that most people probably don't have access to.
Yeah.
And so and you definitely want to make that help available to everyone else,
He's something else.
Jim Ward is a beautiful person. He is so kind. He's a good writer. He's a good game designer. Absolutely love working with Jim. I love working with Jim.
So you mentioned all the things that you have, the NPCs, the settings, the terrain. Like, I know there are ways to track it, and you have something that you mentioned in your Kickstarter. And you want to talk about your World Anvil, what that is and how that works for players?
I was about to ask about that.
Oh, well, it didn't look like you were, and I didn't want to bore people with dead air. I'm sorry, Sparky.
You beat me.
The World Anvil is a site where you can go. I think the original conception of it was as a DM, GMCK. You can go there and kind of whatever world you're playing, and you can upload your content and you can run your campaign on it. Well, it turned out to be a fantastic place for publishers and creators and designers to bring their stuff kind of not so much as alive as more accessible. And the Codex of Erd is a huge world. I mean, I've written easily 400 to 500,000 words on it. Yeah, I mean, it's a mountain of material, heraldry, NPCs, all of this stuff. So the World Anvil becomes a place where these maps you see on the wall behind me have been uploaded. The world map has as well. And we're working on actually the solar system around an animated piece for that. And then everything that I've written is on that map. You click, you zoom in on the map, and as you zoom in on a terrain piece, you can click it, and it pops up and tells you what this ridgeline is, what this escarpment is, whatever. And the more I detail it, every time, like today, I was working on the Brachian coast, which is impacted into the Undying War. And each of the pieces I wrote, I sent it to him, and he's uploading them to the World Anvil. So it gives you really quick access. And one of the nice things about the World Anvil, all of our published adventures are uploaded on it. So if you subscribe, I think you got to go through the Patreon to get it. Mm-hmm. It's like $15 a month, but you have access to all the 100 or so adventures that we've published because they're uploaded where they are on the map, and you can just download them and start reading them and start playing from the map.
Okay. So Sparky, you got any before I hog all this time? I brought you on here because you're my resident favorite nerd. So
I think I'm honored by that, JR. I don't know. That was going to be my next question leading into about the World Anvil, because that is a really good, useful resource. And
Although
And
be warned, the World Anvil, those worlds, when you dive into all the connecting links, the way it works, like A links to B links to, you can follow a whole story just through that. It will suck you in if you're not
it's like
careful. So
Wikipedia at 3 a.m.
yes, exactly. Or TikTok if you're Steve.
Or or TikTok.
So one of the things I realized, I had this light bulb moment. I grabbed just a map off of Google because, like I said, I don't map for this dungeon, and I realized all the rooms were numbered. And I'm like, I bet if I just write what's an even room and I match the number to things, my job gets a lot easier. And I was telling Sparky, because I thought I just invented the wheel. He's like, dude, that's a freaking module. So are you going to have any like modules or one-offs that are going to come out in this 5e setting that you're putting out in the future?
Well, one of the things we're doing with one-offs, the VTT platforms are really friendly to those things. So we'll do short encounters and load those up in VTT. It'll be for 5th edition and Castles and Crusades as well. So yeah, that's definitely in the offing.
And that's actually something you also offer for the Patreon. You get weekly or every other week Davis's little adventure hooks and some stat blocks, and which is pretty neat. I think you're also
you get a nice chunk
too.
with the Patreon. The Patreon is, I think, from the consumer side of things, it's the best approach. You're going to get the most if you like digital. It's all digital content, of course. It's not printed, but it's
so what kind
you
of
get
stuff
access.
can they get on the Patreon, since you haven't talked about that yet? What all is there if they're considering wanting to support what you're doing?
So I'm gonna have to remember it. So we've got 5 levels. The first level is just $1, and that gives you the GM tricks of the trade, which there's 520, just over 500 of those things in there, and growing, because every time we do it every Thursday at 4:30 Central Standard Time, and whatever I wrote or we discussed goes into the GMTT on Patreon. The next one is just kind of I think it's $2, and you just get the GMTT and then odd and end things that Tim finds from the archives. Like we sent a bunch of the original logos for the Crusader magazine that we did years ago out to him. So you just get kind of, bits and pieces like that. And then the $5 level, you get everything below that. I'm not really sure what else you get at the $5, but you get a couple of things. The $10 when it kind of kicks in, and you get the weekly adventure fiction pieces and odd and ends and pieces. And then on the $5 level gives you access to World Anvil, I think. $10 level, a little bit deeper access. And then at $15, which is the highest, you get all of that, and then complete access to the World Anvil, complete access to Davis's weekly, I think it's weekly adventure, right? He does a weekly one-page adventure, and then magic items and NPCs, whatever else he's rolled off his noodle. So yeah, I think it's more than worth it. Just if you can get into the World Anvil, if you can enjoy that side of things, it's definitely more than worth it.
It's kind of interesting to me because I think that is kind of a progressive notion in the RPG community, or just the publishing community either. I'm starting to see more and more authors and publishers kind of selling their worlds or their fiction as a service. You pay X amount, a year or a month, and you get if there's novelists too, $100 a year, you get all of our books for this year. And now I'm starting to see that kind of in this with the RPG content, and I think that's a really clever idea, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that going forward, a lot more.
It's essentially the Netflix, model, because Netflix took the idea of they killed Blockbuster for all of us that liked Blockbuster, but yeah.
I actually found my card when I was cleaning my room a couple months ago. I'm like, should I send it to a museum?
But I mean, you pay whatever it is now, I think $25 or something, and you have access to all these movies, and it's a great model. My only issue with this approach to the model is, at the end of the day, you don't really own it, right? No. Unless you've downloaded it, and once you quit paying that fee. But I think for the way the internet is structured, it's brilliant, because the internet is not a bookstore. I don't think bookstores are going away or going anywhere. I mean, our print sales we've watched our digital revenue increase year by year by year, and the print sales increase right along with it year by year by year. So we're not seeing any kind of crippling of print with more digital content, and I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I just think that the subscription model, which Patreon is just like you said, Spark. It's a really good way to reach out, and people have access to stuff, and it's not expensive, so you can find those creators you like and get into it.
Yeah, and it gives the customers who really like a company or the product, the ability to give a little bit extra. It's
Right.
like in my case, I love the print. I've blown up my print collection since started playing CNC, but I also buy the digital alongside of it because the digital is good for quick reference and do a word search on it, but for deep study, and I think some of that is how the brain functions because I can interpret and retain information out of a book a lot better than digital.
Me too. Yeah, you and I are right there.
And I've read studies about the science of that, and so it's like, yeah, books aren't going anywhere.
Well, the reason that you remember it better in print, and this I'll try not to go too nerdy on it, is because there's not just the visual, like you're reading it, so you're learning it that way. There's the hand action of holding the book and turning the page that triggers muscle memory too. So you're learning it on many different facets, and it affects that way. Although I think as the evolution of some of the digital e-readers come out to be more almost like just a digital book, like, I mean, as far as like it opens like a book instead of just a flat device, you'll see some of that shift. But I think that's just us old fogies being old.
I think actually you're dead on. And years ago, about 10 years ago, and we used Flash to do this, the TLG catalog, when you went to the catalog page on the website, it showed an image of it. And when you clicked it, it had a page. One page would be turned over at, what do they call it? Dog ear at the top. Yeah. So you'd click the dog ear and you could, if you listened, you could hear the page turn. It'd go, as it opened. Mm-hmm. So you could flip through the pages of this thing. And
that's nice.
Peter Bradley and I were working on this just the other day. We believe that InDesign allows us to do this. So we're going to try in this Kickstarter, we're going to try in the next week or so to get the first chapter so that people can read it like you do a book and hear that. It's funny because I just want to hear the page turn.
I bet you like the clickety clack of your keyboard too. You don't want that silent nonsense.
Exactly. I want to know I'm alive.
Yeah. That's kind of like when I had my first computer. It was really quiet, had really quiet fans. I was used to the old beige models, which, sounded like a turboprop running or some crap. And this one, first time I turned on, I'm like, it's broken. It's not running. Oh, it's just quiet. Hell.
So I know you both are going to remember this. I was explaining, one of my kids asked me not long ago about, he said something like, I can't remember somebody, do you know those types of air conditioners that you propped in the window, or you did something in the window? And I proceeded to spin this wonderful tale of the greatest invention of all time is the air conditioner that goes in the window, because it blows, it spits a little water on you. The noise is comforting. The air is cool. Yes.
Hey, bring them to Stone County, Arkansas, and there's plenty of those. Of course, we're like, Stone County's like 50 years behind everybody else.
Yeah.
So, there we are. So.
But Florida understands the value of that. They built a statue to the man that invented the air conditioning.
Excellent.
As they should.
So I'm going to steal Sparky's question, but so you mentioned when you were dealing with the kids, some of the plot hooks that you didn't think they would grab. So what's the funniest thing that you've written that people grab as a plot hook and you're like, no, I wasn't actually writing it for that, but do you have any of those?
One of the things, I'm still fighting this now. So I did an adventure with the younger kids, and they entered this tower that's partially submerged. Now, the tower itself, the base of the tower was flooded because there was a hole in the wall, and there's a monster in there. Well, they had a bag of holding, or portable hole. They had a portable hole.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so what they wanted to do was dive into the water and open the portable hole so that it would drain all the water out.
That's actually genius.
It's genius. It's absolute. Well, I started to say, well, yeah, that'll work. And then I stopped. I stopped, and I thought, oh, wait a minute. These people are insane. These poor kids they're just nuts. And if I let them drain the water out of this tower, they're going to go to a lake
or the ocean.
They're going to start draining everything. So I didn't allow it. I said the water has to be physically pushed through. That was about 8 months ago. Not a game goes by that they don't bring up that portable hole.
We have a pump now.
Yeah.
We're going to pump this whole lake out.
They think it's the most ridiculous ruling. You're just ruled against this. Blah 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 blah. I did. Yes. Yes, I did.
I probably would have allowed it and then regretted it later.
The most
that's
important DM rule. You can say no.
Yes.
No. The power of no.
It's funny though when you get especially younger players, and Jarrett, sounds like you're going to be running some younger people. Their conceptualization of games is different than ours. They've been playing video games, so it's a whole different approach. So they've already got this kind of imagination locked in, right? They've seen stuff that we've never seen because of all the graphics, and our graphics weren't great, back in the day. So they've seen all this really cool stuff, and then when you tell them they can do anything they want, it's absolutely crazy. It's just nuts.
So I played a game. Originally, I was just going to develop something. It was just a D6 system. It was going to be really easy because I figured I needed to make it idiot proof. And so I'm like, we were playing the system, and my youngest son, had come over from his experience with role-playing game with Skyrim. So he's facing his first enemy, and he's like, can we aim our shots? And I'm like, okay, what do you got? He goes, I don't like this guy. I want to shoot him in the knee, and I want him to have to tell everybody for the rest of his life, I used to be an adventurer until I took an arrow to the knee. And I'm just thinking,
oh my God,
I'm going to allow it. Why not?
Yeah. But that's what's cool when they come. And that's one of the best things about it. I think the reason I enjoy GMing the most, more than I do enjoy playing, because the players come at you with such crazy stuff. And it's cool. It keeps you on your toes. I mean, it gets all the juices flowing. It's just hilarious.
And then when they do something crazy and it works and it like delivers the heroic moment, that's what it's about right there. I mean, like 90% of the time it fails, and like our illusionist gnome blew himself up in a fireball. It's like it'd been cool if it worked, but
or the day I put a certain sword in a bag of holding and killed the whole party. Oops. Sometimes stuff happens.
Sometimes it happens, but that's the thing. And Davis and I were talking about this the other day. The game offers you, because the reset's not as easy as it is in a video game. It offers you those epic moments, and they're rare. And if your system allows you to really try them, it's going to make a moment so memorable. You're going to remember it 10 years from now, because you did whatever. And the other night, character got separated. Aiden's rogue thief, and he just, for some strange reason, decided to attack this forest giant by himself, alone. And I thought, well, he's dead. I mean, there's just no way. But he scored a natural 20 and then a backstab max damage twice or some crazy shit. And he did so much damage in 3 melee rounds that essentially he killed the giant. It was really cool. They'll remember that moment for years and years. And that's what RPGs really bring to the table.
Do you actually have a natural 20 critical hit roll in your system?
We do. We've got quite a number that you can use. I use a very basic system, and this is in the CKG as well. If you hit with a natural 20, you do maximum damage plus a D4. So you can do a huge amount of damage very quickly. And it happened to be in Castles and Crusades, as a rogue, as a backstab, you do quadruple damage. So when she stabbed, he's playing a female character. When she stabbed, whatever, however that would go, stabbed the giant, rolled a natural 20, quadruple damage using a short sword. So it was 6 times 4, 24 plus the bonus plus it was just crazy. It was like 32 points of damage in 1 melee round. I was like, what?
Nice.
Yeah, but it was epic. It was an epic moment.
So our epic moments with Sparky go the other direction, where all of us missed for almost 20 rounds. Like we were just fanning each other with our swords. It finally ended not by one of us scoring, but by one of us hitting a natural 1 and killing each other that way instead.
I think one of the most memorable nights for me for bad rolls was was an A0 in the goblin dining hall area, where it was like 20 something goblins that are all drunk off their ass, and the party. They tried to do it like a sneaking around. The thief was killing one here and killing one there, and then something alerted the goblins, and it was on. But I rolled 12 fumbles that night.
Good God!
And we were running Jay Scott's critical hit tables, and they're brutal. They are, or at least at that time, they were brutal as hell. But they were rolling a lot of 20s, and I was rolling nothing but 1s. The goblins were falling all over the damn place and shit. And it almost went TPK, but all those fumbles saved him too. It was just epic.
Yeah, but Pete in this Youngbloods game, they do. Pete was using the critical hits, where when you roll, you go to a chart and you decapitate someone or whatever. And I kept telling him, don't do that because it's going to go against you. If you're using crits, I'm going to use crits and I'm swinging more. So in the end, it's just going to go against you. But that guy rolled a critical fumble, rolled a 1. So we went to the critical fumble table, and then he rolled a natural 20, which is you decapitate yourself.
How does that work?
We don't know.
We've seen some of those where like the fumble with the critical fail, and it's like you kill yourself, and I'm like, I'm trying to envision how you kill yourself if you're firing an arrow. Like, we'll just roll again on the critical hit table.
It's like
and then after that, after we had rolled, they're like, well, I guess if it ricocheted, I'm like, well, good thing you told me that after, because I'd have killed you. That would have been the justification I needed to make it make sense. But all right, so that sounds really fun. Is there anywhere where they can join the community and share these fun stories as they're, adventuring in the worlds of Troll Lord games?
Yeah, absolutely. Go to our website and go to the Discord channel, and that's where we got a ton of channels for just general stuff. You can talk to. I've got a channel too, where if you have questions for me, I go in there and answer them. We got a channel on air and all kinds of stuff. So definitely the Discord, but we're on Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. We're just about everywhere.
All right, and we wouldn't be anywhere if we hadn't started first with Gary and his Dungeons and Dragons. So, what was it like when you met him for the first time?
So I'd never seen a picture of Gary. This is the year 2001. We'd been talking on the phone and emailing for months as we put projects together, but he came up, we were getting ready. Gen Con 2001. It's going to be Wednesday morning. We're frantically putting the booth together. Todd and I were, and this elderly gentleman walks up, ponytail, beard, and asks if I want to go have a smoke. And I smoked in those days. And I was like, my first thought is, well, yeah, of course I want to have a smoke, but who are you?
Who's this weirdo?
who's just randomly asking me to have a smoke? And I'm trying to I'm being polite, trying to stammering around. And he started to grin, and he knew immediately that I didn't know who he was. That's kind of how Gary was. And then I figured out, oh, wait a minute, I see what's going on here. And then, of course, we introduced ourselves and proceeded. We got along instantly. We went out. Ironically, and you'll appreciate this, Jared. We went out to the back loading dock, sat down in a couple chairs, started smoking and talking history. We didn't talk game design, publishing, not once. We sat there for like 30 minutes just talking history stuff. It was great.
It's a frustrated history nerd. I totally appreciate that. So
yes,
that's the great thing about being a historian is all the math is done for you. And if you're wrong, they're all dead and they're not going to disagree.
No one's going to argue much. So
is there any one period of history that you want to include in a game that you haven't yet?
No, my games, I tend to like the medieval period, and that's all over air. The early medieval period, stopping about 1200s or so. That's my favorite game period. Gary's was the Renaissance, interestingly enough. But my actual favorite period in history is about 1840, so such and such, the end of the Biedermeier era up through the end of World War One. That's my absolute European history, mostly Habsburg. Absolutely love that. I eat that stuff up for some strange reason. Who knows?
Fair. All right. So we're going to wrap this up. Sparky, did you have anything else? Because I brought you on. You're an excellent nerd, and we appreciate you being here.
I try.
He's so humble and modest, people. It's absolutely true.
Sparky's good people. He's always in my streams boosting us along.
Yeah.
So
I believe in the company. I like your product, and I like what you're doing. And I don't apologize for that.
Yeah, well, thank you for all the support, man. You have no idea how helpful it is.
So clearly this is winding down, but before we let you go, is there anything about the Undying War Kickstarter and Troll Lord games in general that we didn't ask that you want to tell us?
The only thing I'll say about the Undying War, it is an adventure, like I said earlier, that begins pretty simply. When you begin on this quest, you have not even a quest. When you begin on this road, you don't even know you're on a road towards an epic adventure. And it kind of evolves into that. But the adventure itself, if the GM is inclined, the material will be there's a romance involved. The evil Coburg the Undying, this is the Undying War because Coburg the Undying is waging the war. But he's also looking for his lost love, the Lady of Garun, who is an extraordinarily evil woman. So these two evil characters, there's this kind of romance involved. So there's a whole nother depth, I think, to this adventure path that we're very proud of.
Okay. So, dear listener, before we let you go, we're going to remind you that your thoughts matter too. So please be kind and speak your mind in the reviewing platforms. And there are ways that if you're buying the game over on DriveThruRPG and the other sites, they will let you review them as well. So do a thing, and if you've got a blog, write posts, write YouTube comments, whatever. Like all the things matter. It helps get the word out there. And so, how can people find Trollord Games?
The easiest way is the website at www.trollord.com. We've also got Facebook pages, and we're on all social media. But if you go over to trollord.com, you can see there's a little drop down circle. I think you click the circle, and all this stuff opens up where you can go to. And whatever social media platform you prefer, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, whatever, we are there in some capacity.
And I will say they made it very, very easy. I spent like 5 seconds finding all their links. Most of the time it takes a little longer. So if you go to their website, you will find all the things, people. All right. And Sparky, we did mention that you run the Twitch and YouTube channel Old Time Tavern. So can you tell people how they can find your awesome community?
Look up Old Times Tavern on twitch.com, and you can find the links to all our social media. We have a Discord, we have a Twitter where sometimes I'll make an opinion, which is oddly supported and makes people mad, even though it's not that controversial. Whatever.
Yeah, there are some of his controversial takes that we had to let go. Like, we're not allowed to talk about backstory because Chuck says that'll get to an hours-long rant, and we would derail the whole thing. And we weren't supposed to talk about
my
culture.
controversial take was all the hot takes are all 90% of them are bad from both sides. Everything is just bad and terrible, and people need to chill out a little bit. But
all right. And you can find us on Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. We do have an email at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Normally Cisca's answering those, so please be kind to her. You don't want to hurt her fifis. You can join us on Facebook, where you probably found this link at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, be sure to put it in the comment section. If you have any comments for Steve, and you put them in the Facebook, or when we share this on YouTube, I will pass them along to him. And if it's appropriate, he can answer those for you. We have a website at anchor.fm/blasters tech and tech blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades, where you can support the show for an reoccurring monthly basis for as little as 99 cents a month, help keep the lights on. Or you can support the show over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley, where be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast. And I promise I will keep Doc Cisca and Nick Garber rolling in all the coffee they can drink. And we'll go from there. And maybe we'll listen to Doc tell us about her favorite meat again for the billionth time. But thank you for... She's trying to get the meadery in Atlanta that she likes to sponsor us, just so she has an excuse to write it off on her taxes.
Like someone was trying to get a Dr. Pepper sponsorship.
Yes.
I totally get it. Like, you just want it's all about getting the tax credit, people. But right. Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom.